The history of Oregon is a complex and multifaceted narrative shaped by natural forces, indigenous cultures, European exploration, and later, the influx of settlers from the eastern United States. Its story unfolds against the backdrop of some of the most dramatic landscapes in North America, including rugged coastlines, towering mountain ranges, and vast high deserts. For thousands of years before European contact, Oregon was home to a diverse array of Native American peoples, each with distinct cultures, languages, and ways of life. Archaeological evidence suggests that the first inhabitants arrived in the region at least 15,000 years ago, following the end of the last ice age. These early peoples developed complex societies, relying on the abundant resources of the region's rivers, forests, and coastline. Tribes such as the Chinook, Nez Perce, Klamath, and Umatilla lived in relative isolation, engaging in trade with neighboring tribes and developing rich oral traditions that passed down their histories and worldviews from one generation to the next. The first documented European contact with the Oregon region came in the late 18th century. In 1778, British explorer Captain James Cook made landfall along the Pacific Northwest coast during his third voyage. While his visit was brief, it marked the beginning of European interest in the region. Over the following decades, Spanish, British, and Russian explorers sailed along the coast, mapping the area and trading with the indigenous peoples. The fur trade became a driving economic force for these early explorers, and by the early 19th century, fur trappers from the Hudson's Bay Company had begun to establish more permanent trading posts in Oregon. One of the most significant European expeditions into the interior of the Oregon region was the Lewis and Clark expedition. Commissioned by President Thomas Jefferson in 1804, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark set out to explore the newly acquired Louisiana Territory and to find a navigable water route to the Pacific Ocean. The expedition reached the mouth of the Columbia River in 1805, where they established Fort Clatsop. The journals kept by Lewis and Clark provided valuable information about the geography and peoples of the Pacific Northwest. In the early 19th century, the Oregon Country, an area encompassing present-day Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and parts of Montana, Wyoming, and British Columbia, became the subject of competing claims by the United States and Great Britain. Both nations sought control over the lucrative fur trade, and the ownership of the region remained unresolved for several decades. In 1818, the two nations agreed to a joint occupation of the Oregon Country, allowing citizens of both countries to live and work in the region while postponing any final decision on sovereignty. The 1830s and 40s marked a significant turning point in Oregon's history as American settlers began to migrate to the region in increasing numbers. This migration was fueled in part by the belief in manifest destiny, the idea that the United States was destined to expand across the North American continent. The Oregon Trail, a 2,170-mile route from Missouri to the Willamette Valley, became the primary route for these pioneers. Beginning in 1836 with small groups of missionaries, the numbers of settlers increased dramatically throughout the 1840s, culminating in what became known as the Great Migration of 1843, when a wagon train of nearly 1,000 settlers made the journey to Oregon. Life on the Oregon Trail was grueling, and many settlers faced hardships along the way, including disease, accidents, and conflicts with Native American tribes. The promise of fertile farmland in the Willamette Valley and the prospect of a better life spurred thousands to make the journey. By the mid-1840s, the influx of American settlers had tipped the balance in favor of U.S. control over the region. In 1846, the Oregon Treaty was signed between the United States and Great Britain, establishing the 49th parallel as the boundary between British and American territories in the Pacific Northwest. Oregon's transition from a sparsely populated frontier to a formal U.S. territory was swift. In 1848, Congress established the Oregon Territory, which initially encompassed all of present-day Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, as well as parts of Wyoming and Montana. This marked the beginning of a new chapter, as settlers continued to pour into the territory, driven by the promise of land and opportunity. In 1859, Oregon was admitted to the Union as the 33rd state. Its constitution reflected the values and concerns of the time. Notably, it included a provision that prohibited African Americans from settling in the state, a reflection of the deep racial prejudices that existed among many of the settlers, despite Oregon being a free state that did not allow slavery. The latter half of the 19th century saw Oregon continue to grow and develop, with the expansion of railroads playing a crucial role in its economic development. The arrival of the Transcontinental Railroad in the 1880s connected Oregon to the rest of the United States, facilitating the transportation of goods and people and further accelerating industrialization. Agriculture, timber, and fishing became the backbone of the state's economy. This period of growth also brought challenges, particularly for the Native American peoples who had called Oregon home for millennia. As settlers encroached on their lands, many tribes were forcibly removed to reservations, and conflicts between Native Americans and settlers, such as the Rogue River Wars and the Modoc War, erupted throughout the state. By the end of the 19th century, the indigenous population had been decimated by disease, warfare, and displacement, and the traditional ways of life of Oregon's Native American tribes had been irrevocably altered. The 20th century brought further changes to Oregon, as it transitioned from a primarily rural, agrarian society to a more urban and industrialized state. The Great Depression of the 1930s hit Oregon hard, as demand for the state's timber and agricultural products plummeted. However, the New Deal programs implemented by President Franklin D. Roosevelt helped to mitigate the worst effects of the economic downturn, providing jobs and infrastructure improvements throughout the state. World War II was a transformative period for Oregon, as the demand for ships and war materials led to a boom in the state's shipbuilding and manufacturing industries. The post-war period saw continued population growth and urbanization, particularly in Portland, which emerged as the state's largest city and economic hub. Today, Oregon is known for its natural beauty, progressive politics, and a diverse economy that includes technology, tourism, and a growing wine industry. Its history, shaped by waves of migration, conflict, and innovation, continues to influence its identity and the way it navigates the challenges of the modern world. From its indigenous roots to its status as a beacon for pioneers, Oregon's story is one of resilience, adaptation, and enduring connection to the land. Thank you for listening to another episode of Loopholery, your go-to podcast channel for quick, witty, and insightful takes on random topics, all in 8 minutes or less. Whether we're diving into quirky facts, exploring weird loopholes, or just pondering life's strange questions, we keep it short, fun, and engaging. Perfect for curious minds on the go. Like or subscribe, and get your fix of unpredictable knowledge bites.